We're back on the record, and we're going to start with the Enforcement and Compounding Committee. Dr. Schad?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Because I want you to hear me, because unlike the prior report, this report is going to be quick, succinct, have an exciting presentation, and one non-controversial motion. Okay.
Are you done yet?
Move approval.
Report on the presentation by the University of California, San Diego's experimental program regarding access to medication from an automatic drug delivery system. Okay, the background. In July 2017, the board heard and discussed the results of University of California, San Diego experimental study involving the use of ADS technology to dispense new and refill prescriptions to employees non-adjacent to the pharmacy counter. This study required a waiver of California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 1713, to allow first-time fills to be dispensed to a machine not adjacent to the pharmacy counter. During the 2017 board meeting, the board also approved an extension of the study another 12 months. Additionally, the board requested more data to be provided to provide a distinction between new prescriptions and previously dispensed prescriptions. The committee discussion consisted of Jan Hirsch providing a presentation of the status and direction of the experimental program regarding access to medications. This provided a PowerPoint presentation, the study of expanded use of ADD extension update. The committee was advised that no action was required and that the presentation was being provided consistent with the board's request to receive an update on the study after the extension was granted. A copy of the presentation is provided in attachment 1. As kind of an addition to this, yesterday we, as two board members and the board staff, went on a tour and saw the machine in action. It was a very good presentation, and we had nothing but positive things to say about it. We appreciate it.
And I agree with that. I was there.
Okay. Presentation, discussion, and consideration of the board's citation and fine program. Background. At the request of the committee, Board Chiefs of Enforcement Julia Ansell and Tom Lennox provided general enforcement information on board investigations as well as specific information about citations and fines issued by the board during 2017. Chairperson Schad, that's me, noted that the presentation was part of the board's effort to increase transparency regarding the citation and fine program. Furthermore, board members noted that the regulated public have a misconception about the board members' involvement into the issuance of citations and fines. As part of the discussion, the committee was advised that most programs within DCA have a fine and citation program. Further, it is noted that the board's authority to issue letters of corrections and letters of admonishment are unique to the pharmacy board. Ms. Harold added the Board of Pharmacy has its own inspectors staffed by licensed pharmacists, which differs from other boards. The committee was provided with the criteria that staff consider when assessing a fine, which are included in California Regulations Title 16, Section 1775.2. As part of the discussion, the committee clarified that the profession must understand all types of enforcement action. Additionally, the committee noted that the need for ongoing transparency in all policies and procedures guiding the use of citations and fine. During this meeting, the board will provide a presentation, a very good presentation, on general enforcement information and board investigations, as well as specific information about boards and fines. Julie, are you here? Oh, there she is. Okay. We saw this in the enforcement committee, and has lots of information. It's not an end-all to be-it-all. It raises some more questions, but this is kind of step one in a step to provide more transparency to the members of the profession.
It doesn't sound
Hey,
like
Julie.
Hi.
There
Is that
you
better?
go. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so we gave this presentation at the Enforcement Committee meeting, and we're gonna, it's a couple different pieces of information that we did include in this next presentation, but it's for the most part the same information. So you can go ahead to the next slide. Thank you. So thanks for having me today. This is going to be an enforcement overview and providing you some detail on our citation and fine process. And what I'm first going to do is just give you a little overview. We're going to have some terms and definitions. We're going to go through the citation process, provide you with some inspection data, case investigation data, and then finally some citation and fine data. If you go to page 3 on slides, we throw out a lot of terms in these meetings. And I'm not going to go line by line in the next 3 slides, but this does provide you some definitions that kind of explain the terminology when we talk about enforcement. So these are provided as kind of reference as we go through the presentation. And then I'm going to get into some of the statistics. So the definitions and terminology are on pages 3, 4, and 5. But before I get too deep into the data part of it, what I wanted to do is just provide kind of an overview of the citation and fine process and what happens when a complaint comes into the board and the steps that we take, okay? So we get a complaint, and this isn't in your presentation. It's just I'm kind of just verbalizing it, but the terms are here laid out. We receive a complaint. It comes into the board, and we initiate a case or case investigation. And in a couple of slides, I'll show you the sources of these complaints. But so the case comes in, the supervising inspector reviews the complaint and assigns it to an inspector. And keep in mind, we all know the individuals that are performing these case investigations are all licensed pharmacists, the inspectors, as well as the supervising inspectors. So the inspector then takes that case, that complaint information, and they perform an investigation. And there may be multiple different tasks that happen. There may be an inspection. They may be collecting records. There's just different things that happen within a case investigation. It definitely depends on the nature of the complaint. When the inspector is finished with their investigation, they'll submit a report to their supervising inspector. The supervising inspector reads through the report and recommends what course of action should be taken, if anything, with the case investigation. And that is kind of a first level review. So again, at this point, you've had 2 pharmacists look at the complaint, the inspector and then the supervising inspector. And then we actually have a 3rd level of review, which is the executive officer, the assistant executive officer, or myself, chief enforcement, myself and/or Tom Lennox will look at the complaint as well.
And I wasn't listening close enough. You said the original inspector went out and did an investigation already before everybody
Yeah,
else
so the
looked?
investigation happens.
And then
they
the
write
other
a
2
report.
levels review.
Yeah, and then it goes to a 1st level review at the supervisor, and then a 2nd level review to Ginny, myself, Tom Lennox, and/or Ann Sodergren. And sometimes we do it together in certain settings when we're looking at case investigations in the reports. So that just kind of gives you an overview of the process that we take. And so some of those terms are described there. So you can go ahead and go to slide number 6. So we talked about the case investigation, and sometimes there is an inspection involved, right? But these are the types of inspections that we do typically. So for 2017, we went out and did over 2,400 inspections with our staff. Right now, we have a staff of over 50 inspectors. I have 9 or 10 supervising inspectors, and then I have 40 inspectors. So we did 700 complaint inspections last year. We did 385 routines. And a routine is typically, it can be requested by the pharmacy. Maybe the pharmacy is moving. They possibly want to do business in another state, and they often need a home state inspection to be able to conduct business in another state. And they can ask us for that, and we can provide that type of inspection. But just as a side note, I know the board, we talked about the last couple meetings about doing more routine inspections and increasing that. And so we have implemented that across the inspector team. We have assigned routine inspections on top of normal complaint workload, normal investigations. So you should see that routine number go up in the next year. And then, of course, we have pharmacist recovery program probation inspections that we need to do on an annual basis. We have compounding inspections that are mandated by law, as well as outsourcing inspections, which is our newest license type. This data is from at the end of December 2017. So we've actually done, to the numbers in a couple weeks, probably 20 to 22 outsourcing inspections at this point. And on that team, we just have a team of 2 inspectors and 1 supervising inspector. And our supervising inspector is actually out there doing the groundwork and performing the inspections. So we're pretty proud of the work we've done so far in that realm with outsourcing.
And so inspection would mean that they actually left their office and went out and chucked something out.
Yes.
And maybe multiple trips and maybe multiple things, but
Yes.
it's not just,
Yeah, it's not just a phone call. No, yeah, they go to the location and they look at certain things. Yep, absolutely.
Am I on? Oh, good. Also, one of the things that I think the board members should note with this is that, so we have 50 inspectors, there's 10 supervising, and then 40 that do the inspection work, is that right?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And so that looks like about 60 a year. And so that each inspector does. Is that about right?
It depends on the team that they're on. It varies across the different teams. We have, how many teams do we have now? 8 or 9 different teams. So for outsourcing, right now we only have, I think we have 45 applications. So in the end, they'll probably only do within a year at this point, because we have 45 applicants, they'll do somewhere around 40 inspections. But the outsourcing inspections are a week long, and they typically travel out of state. They'll go on a Monday, they'll inspect Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then they'll come home on a Friday. So it depends on the team. But yeah, you could say each inspector probably does somewhere between 40 upwards to 90 to 100 inspections a year. Yeah.
So the outsourcing inspectors, how many
Yeah.
of those are there?
So right now we have 2 and
So if
1
we take
supervisor.
those 2 out, so if you take those 2 out, we're still left with like 47 inspectors.
Maybe 39, because we have the supervisors, and the supervisors are going to help us a little bit with some routines, not very many throughout this next year, but typically the supervisors are managing the people, answering questions about how to go about the investigation. They're doing a lot of supervisory and managerial roles, reading the cases, giving guidance to the inspectors in that realm.
So that could be generally the 1 to 2 a week then is
Inspections?
average. And we're just talking about average numbers. Because some will do more, some will do less, but in terms of the number of inspectors we have. I think that's the point that Alan's trying to make.
Let me go back and get that data for you so I can
a
to
little
give you.
a little productivity information would
Yeah.
be valuable
Yeah,
to the,
I'd
to
like
the board.
to look at that, because I wouldn't want to just give a flat number, but
well, and I think along that line, interested in how long does an inspection, so outsourcing, you said takes like about a week, but so like a compliant inspection, I mean, just an idea of how much time's involved in each one of these. And there's got to be time, like you go out and you investigate, but then there's also the report when you get back to the office,
report
too.
writing, yeah.
That probably takes more time than potentially the investigation itself.
yes, I would agree. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Please help.
So the inspection is one piece of an investigation. So if it's a fraud investigation, you're doing a lot of work with respect to if it's acquisitions, and you're looking at a lot of records, you're looking at a lot of inventory. So the inspection itself is assessing the operations of the business at the day that you're there to do it, right? You might be collecting evidence at the same time, but a lot of the investigation work is not happening at the time of the inspection itself.
So, but do they give you notice about what they are doing? Say, like Ann said, if this involves a lot of investigation, that might take a little longer time. So would they give you a heads up to the supervisor, say, this might take a little longer for the report as opposed to 3
Of
days
course,
or a
yes.
week?
The inspectors are in constant contact with
So
their supervisor.
you'll be updated with
And
the
everybody
status.
has, a list of the cases they're assigned and what, different place the cases, have they done an inspection? Have they reviewed records? There's constant communication back and forth with the inspector and the supervisor in terms of where they are in that timeline on a case investigation.
And even then, do you give them a timeline that they still have to give you a final report as opposed to like whenever they think they're finished?
Yeah, we do have internal due dates for the inspectors. Yes, we do. Yes, we provide that to them, and we work with the supervisor to keep deadlines on case investigations as well as reports. Yes.
When you, excuse me, I have a question.
Yeah.
When you come across criminal, activity, who does the referral to the district attorney's office, or who makes that decision in your chain of command?
To the DA?
Yeah, if you do an inspection, you come across something that's criminal. I mean, where in the chain of command, and who makes that decision to walk it over?
Go ahead.
Well, you can
No,
answer
go.
it.
You.
Okay, it
please, go
depends
ahead.
on the nature of what is criminal. A lot of what we investigate would be considered criminal if brought by someone else. We tend to work the cases as much as we can. Sometimes we do it as part of a team, sometimes we don't. So, for example, it's not unusual for us to go out with local Bureau DEA or with the Bureau of Senior Abuse and Fraud because they have criminal sanctions. And so there would be an example where we do it. If we uncover serious criminal activity, we would, depending on what it is, we would bring in the appropriate individuals. But a lot of the DAs want more completed cases rather than there's this thing going on out there. Everyone's busy, everyone's got their own workload. So unless we have an established relationship with the entity, it's hard sometimes at the front end to say, here, we just found this case, you need to go investigate it. It depends on what it is. The pharmacist, for example, this morning we were talking about pharmacists impersonating other pharmacists and practicing. We had DAs on those cases within 24 hours. So it just depends on the nature of the case and how busy the local DA is.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would imagine some cases would be, administrative, and other ones would go criminally if you come across that as an inspector, where you could refer it, for prosecution.
Generally, though, because we issue the license, we're very interested in the administrative side of taking away or disciplining a license where someone's errant and violating the law. Especially the greater the public protection issue, the faster we should be working the case.
Okay, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I understand what you're asking, but it depends on where we are, what county we're in, what our relationships are with the local law enforcement, what they're doing, and what the nature of the violation is, the degree to which someone else is going to be working.
Have you had many referrals to that level?
To the district attorney?
Yeah, to district attorney.
I don't know how
I don't know if we-
I can't think off the top of my head how many where we report that. We refer to law enforcement.
We can check, we can try to pull some stats on that. I would say that we don't do it very frequently. I think it's more of an exception than a rule, but we can pull the data on that report.
So you're not seeing any problems out there that need to be referred
So
to
I think
district
that,
attorneys?
like Jenny said, we're focused on the administrative piece, and sometimes you might reach out to,
No, you're fine. Thank you.
So our jurisdiction is really the administrative piece. So there are times when we do reach out. Sometimes they're interested, sometimes they're not. So several of our DAGs have good working relationships with DAs and try to partner when we've got the administrative issue going on. They're working on the criminal piece. There are also sometimes where there's okay, an attorney help me here, but there's like a conflict between the two, so they can't be running concurrently. I forget what the magical term is.
Say that again, Ann? I couldn't
conflagration.
hear.
There are times where you cannot be pursuing both options. Desiree, what's the word? So you cannot be pursuing the criminal and the administrative at the same time because there's some magical term that creates a conflict.
Never heard of that.
It conflicts with the jurisdiction of someone else. But the other thing we do is we have wonderful laws. Like just this morning, I issued a cease and desist against an entity for doing business outside the U.S. and doing pharmacy practices outside the U.S. We're able to issue and stop the activity right then and there in ways that sometimes the DAs can't do. We use a lot of interim suspension orders or Penal Code 23, which allow us to remove people from practice when they're arraigned or when they are a serious threat. So we have various sanctions available to us that in another world, we would rely on the DAs to do. And we're able to solve the problem by taking them out of practice, which is what our goal is.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Oh, I had a question.
Yeah.
When you come into a case with diversion, lose hundreds of thousands tablet by either pharmacist or technician, do you refer the case to the DA to prosecute, or you just pursue it by the Board of Pharmacy only?
Significant for hundreds of thousands of pills.
Well, it doesn't matter how many. It's just in any case that when we discover a crime committed by the pharmacist or technician on diversion, I mean, do you refer the case to the DA to prosecute, or we just working on suspend the license and that's the end of it?
So a lot of times in large drug diversion cases, we have found out about it because the pharmacy has filed a drug loss report, and in there they indicate that they have notified the local law enforcement. So in large losses, I would say that typically law enforcement has already been advised because the pharmacy themselves that experienced the loss has notified them. We don't find that all the time. In smaller losses especially, we don't see them notifying local law enforcement, but generally for the large losses, the PD has already been notified.
Because it seemed to me there's no consequence. What happened to the diverter when they did those crimes? It seemed like we dropped the ball and let it go, and that's the end of it.
Well, I don't know that I'd say drop the ball. I would say that if there's a significant diversion, we're going to take them to the Attorney General's office and we're going to try to get action on their license, meaning we're going to revoke their license if there's significant diversion and try to take away their livelihood. So that's our role in it.
Well, we do
Board of
that
Pharmacy.
too.
But I would like to see, there's some kind of punishment so they will not keep on repeating over again. Because we see too many cases happening, and we like to see some kind of system we could work on to stop this diversion continue happening.
Albert, are you talking about you'd like to see incarceration as opposed to us taking their licenses?
So I think that the Enforcement Committee, I'll have to go back and refresh, but I believe that the Enforcement Committee did at one point consider a policy that would have made it a policy of the board that when we completed an investigation and we found losses, that we would notify law enforcement. And I believe that after vetting by the board, it was determined that that would not be a policy of the board. I'm happy to go back and research that. And if the chair would like to reconsider that, we can put it on a future agenda item.
Well, I would not like to reconsider that. I remember the conversation on it, and you are correct. And it was extended commentary, and I think we came to a good conclusion on that. For that.
The reason I make those comments that I've been here for 5 years. We've been seeing these things happening over again by the same kind of people, and it seems like nothing stopped. I mean, we have to change course, to do something about. Otherwise, this kind of problem continues.
Understood. I'm going to move on to slide number 7. Talk about inspection outcomes. So at the end of each inspection, after the inspector has gone through the pharmacy, typically they are the pharmacist or whoever's at the pharmacy and getting the inspection by our inspectors. The inspector will hand a inspection report at the end of the inspection, and there's a couple of different things that can be in that inspection report in terms of an outcome. There can be a reference to no violation, so you can see if we had 2,400 inspections, we had over 1,000 facilities that had no violations last year. So approximately 40% if you look at that top number. And then we can have corrections ordered which is just that we're trying to correct some kind of behavior that we think is misaligned with policy and pharmacy law. So again, the second line is 1,038 facilities out of those 2,400 inspections where we had an order of correction. And again, about 40%.
But Julia, can
Yeah.
I ask you a question?
Please.
These 2,436 inspections.
Yes.
I mean, some of them, weren't they initiated because we received a complaint?
Yeah, so in a second, I'm going to
Okay,
go through
sorry.
no, absolutely. It's going to dovetail perfectly into a slide in a one or two slides down. We're going to talk about what the sources are.
Because I'm thinking, 1,000 facilities, it sounds like maybe about 50%, but how many of those were you just doing routine inspections that had nothing to do with a complaint? And so maybe it's actually a higher percentage of the
That was a
number.
prior slide if you'd been paying attention.
I can't hear you.
I'm not sure you wanted to hear all of it.
He
Well,
had said,
that's nothing new, he didn't.
No, it was just on a couple prior slides, that
Yes.
information that you want.
so the routine inspections versus a complaint inspection versus a probation inspection, a compounding inspection is slide number 6. Compounding inspections and then outsourcing inspections. That's what makes up the 2,400 inspections for the year.
But
think
that's
what-
not my, I guess my
Okay.
question is, of this 1,044,
Right?
how many of those were just routine? And
Yeah, so Debbie,
because
we
here it says
didn't-
routine inspections are only 385, and yet here you have 1,044.
Right, so we didn't, our analysis did not go down to that level of detail, breaking out. So we looked at these, we broke down the types, but then we broke down the outcomes of them. We did not say, of the routines, these were the outcomes. Do you know
Got
what I'm
it.
saying? So we can do an additional layer of
Okay.
analysis, absolutely, if that would be helpful.
'Cause I'm
I think
thinking the
that'd be very
routines-
interesting, the whole board. I think
To look
so.
at the outcome of a
Yeah, because I'm
routine.
thinking of routine, I think we're going to find a very high percentage of them had no violations, and they were just
Right.
an opportunity for the board to get there
Yep.
and have a learning
Now I see what you're
situation.
saying. Yeah.
Because I think sometimes the facilities, whether it be pharmacies or whatever, they think that we're kind of coming after them. And we really do want to get out there and provide education.
Right.
It's just, unfortunately, we have these complaints that we also have to.
And we need to, but also what's in front of you here with the corrections, these are kind of like the fix-it tickets. We go in and say, this is in violation of the law, fix it, please. These are not investigation findings. These are
Right.
just the outcome of the inspection. So that's a little different than we go out to get you, because we're about to go to the higher level. The correction is
Uh-huh.
the lowest level finding from an inspection that we're going to issue. We want you to fix it, just provide us proof that you've abated it, we're done.
Got it.
Good.
So if you're going to be up there, Ann, you got to turn your thing on.
I was turning it on over
I know, I'm making a comment just because I see it's off. I'm trying to be helpful. Hello?
You know, helpful.
So let's go to the next slide. We'll talk about the last outcome that you could see on an inspection report, which is written notice, where there's a clear violation. We're letting the pharmacy know on the inspection report that there was a violation of pharmacy law, and that you can see 295 of those 2,400 inspections received the written notice for violation.
Be about 10%.
It's about 12%, yeah.
Now,
Correct.
what cases are referred to the Attorney General?
What?
What's the determining factor? What goes to the Attorney General?
So
Depends.
there is no hard, fast rule.
Mhm.
It is the egregiousness of the violation and the impact to the consumer.
Oh,
Or,
okay.
prior
What is
history,
undermining our ability to meet our consumer protection mandate, those kinds of things.
Go to the next slide. This is the number of cases we opened. So we talked about earlier the number of case investigations. This is the case investigations that we opened in the past 5 years. And so you can see it's a pretty flat line for the most part. And we averaged in the last 5 years opening about 3,500 cases per year. And again, I was alluding to, we're going to talk in a second about what the sources of these cases are, what the sources of the opening are. It's not just a complaint coming in. There are multiple different sources across these cases. Here we go, the magic slide. So how did the complaint or how did this issue, whatever that has been brought to us, how did it get to us? Where did it originate? What was the source? This is where we're opening a case investigation. So we have internal cases where it's possible the board inspector has opened the case. Enforcement personnel on staff may open a case. There may be a licensing application where we open a case. We get clearly cases that are opened from the public, consumer complaints that come in, and law enforcement. You see, we get subsequent arrest notifications, and we'll open a case on some of those. We can get cases from industry. We do receive information on settlements that pharmacies report to us, as well as licensees give us information. We get anonymous sources, and then we have other. It's possible the FDA may give us some information, and we also work with the other boards across DCA. We get information from possibly the optometry board or the vet med board or the medical board. So the sources come from multiple places.
And Julie, this is investigate or cases for individuals too, or just pharmacies?
Both.
So this is everything?
Yeah, this is everything for the year. Yeah, for each of these individual years.
Now there's a lot of cases here. Now, who deals with these in the department? Do they all go through Ann?
Tell them yes.
It feels that way. I'm just kidding. So the majority of these cases are handled by field staff.
By field staff, you're referring
meaning our inspectors.
The inspectors.
Okay.
Mhm. There are some that we do internally. So a criminal conviction case that doesn't require a pharmacist's knowledge, we'll try to do those as desk investigations. We try very hard to keep the work that the pharmacists, that our inspectors are doing, to those things that require a pharmacist's knowledge. So if I can request arrest records and conviction records and write up a summary, do you know what I'm saying? Then we'll do some of those internally. So primarily the law enforcement ones would probably have been done by desk staff. I'd have to poll to get the exact counts, but in general.
Okay, on the internal ones, okay, in 2017, there's 1,264. Now, 395 were just routine inspections that took place. So what else creates an internal case?
So do you want me to, sorry.
It's okay, go ahead.
So sometimes it's based on an application investigation. So we receive something in an application and we're like, that seems a little, so we'll have to open up an investigation for that. Sometimes it's the inspectors out in the field doing a routine and they identify other pharmacies that might require some additional review by the board. So that's another example. So it could be, there's not a single thing that can result in an internal.
The use of the cures reports sometimes we use to initiate investigations. So we run those reports. For example, a doctor gets picked up for excessive prescribing and is disciplined by the medical board. We will run the name of that physician through to find out what pharmacies were filling his prescriptions and did they use appropriate judgment in processing those pharmacy or those prescriptions.
Okay, so was something like the J. Scott case, was that an internal thing?
I don't remember,
Because
but
of the
that
doctors?
one there was actually deaths, but there was also police, and we collaboratively worked on that one with criminal, with other law enforcement
Right.
agencies. We were brought in specifically for our expertise on J. Scott.
I just thought because, there were a couple doctors involved in that.
Well, no, you know what? That was an internal complaint because there were drug deals in the parking lot that the neighbors complained about. That's where that one
Yeah.
came from. I just remember.
Right.
The board's prescription drug abuse team, I think, does a lot of internals because they are data mining, looking at different sources of information.
Thank you. Well, so
And-
wouldn't that have been a public rather than an internal?
That one might have been a regular complaint that we received because we did receive complaints from neighbors in that case that there were drug deals going on in the parking lot and the parking lot was full all the time. But that was part of it. But some of them are truly using cures where we run cures reports and we identify errant
Okay.
things.
Thank you.
Oh, I want to ask you. So how does the anonymous cases come in? I mean, on the board website, I think people have to write down who's the people who complain. So
No, they can file them anonymously, and they can also call us.
We love disgruntled employees. They're real good. A lot of times, they'll tell you everything you want to know about a pharmacy, let me tell you. But the anonymous complaints are very difficult for us to investigate because sometimes we need to follow up and get additional information. And if we don't have that identity of who the individual is, it limits our ability to investigate. Sometimes they won't even tell us exactly what pharmacy it is, which with 7,100 pharmacies in the state means it's going to
hard.
be very difficult
Yeah.
for us to ID it.
Yeah.
But we do accept anonymous complaints. Some agencies don't. We try to work them when we can because we believe that someone is trying to tell us that we've got a public protection issue that we need to go look at.
Yeah, we can
Do
get
we-
those online, and they can also call us. We'll take them on the phone as well, not just online complaints from anonymous.
Do we have a general idea out of the roughly 3,400 cases opened a year, how many of those are for physical pharmacies versus people?
We have counts somewhere.
Yeah, just like half of them, or
So
Yeah, I
I'm
can
going
try.
to guess that the law enforcement ones are probably all going to be individuals.
Mhm.
The rest of them could probably cross over, but a lot of the times, unless it's a criminal conviction case, there's generally more than one respondent in a case. So a lot of times we might be looking at the pharmacy as well as the staff. So generally, our cases will have the multiple respondents, but we can try to drill that down and remove those that are just, or segment out those where it's a sole respondent, if that would be helpful and provide
and
that.
these could also be multiple cases. Like if you open against the PIC and the pharmacy, is that counted as two?
Not on this slide.
Not on this. This is every single individual.
Correct. This single
Right,
investigation.
got it.
Right.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
So the next slide talks about how, we went through the case, we went through the investigation, and then how was the case closed? What was the ultimate resolution on the case? And we have numbers about, citations. Maybe it was referred to the Attorney General. It may have been closed, insufficient evidence, no jurisdiction, no violation, subject educated. Maybe it was an application investigation, and we approved the application or we denied the application. But what this is telling you is basically, across the 5 years, on average, we have about 4,500 cases that we close.
So these are the outcomes, Amy, that you were talking about. So these figures would include the multiple respondents if there were them.
Okay.
Now,
One and a
the
half.
number of multiple respondents, would that influence the larger number of cases closed?
So this is actually respondents, yes.
Oh, okay. And now, does this include cases that, is the number higher because we're catching up on older cases too, or not? With carryover? Did I explain myself well enough?
Well, because I think what you're saying is that the number of cases we open in a year is different than
About
what we're
1,000
closing.
different, so, yeah.
And so when we're opening something, that's a point in time. We open something in 2017. But when we're closing something in 2017, we may be closing something that was opened
Several
in
years.
2017 or 2016 or 2015.
Well, now my concern is that because of the difference between 3,200 and 5,100 there is, say, in 2013, for example. So you've got a lot more cases, and so I wondered where that number, where these numbers come from. What's that difference in the?
So one is capturing the number of cases that were opened during a time period, right? So that's one bucket. So that
And
was the last
that's
slide.
going to be moving forward. I would-
Correct.
Uh-huh.
And then these are of the cases that were closed during this time period, right? So it's kind of a different data set, right?
Yes.
Because if it was opened in 2017, it maybe was not
Probably
closed in
wasn't.
2017.
Correct.
So what this slide represents, it's not a correlation to the previous slide that shows those that were opened. This is not those, this slide is not showing the outcomes of those. This is showing of the cases that we closed in 2017, these were the outcomes.
But I would think that there would be a relationship between the two. There would be some degree of consistency, and I'm not clear, and especially since this is over a period of 5 years.
So,
I think one thing, one artifact you might be seeing here, Alan.
Yeah, artifact.
Is
What am I
in
looking at?
2000, well, this is what I'm thinking might have happened. In 2014, in January 2014, we started to license sterile compounding pharmacies. And if you will remember, that put the brakes on literally everything we did for really 18 months. It slowed down our licensing unit. It also impacted our inspectors because before we could issue any of those licenses, we had to, one, train staff, and two, get them out and inspect the pharmacies, and that included a lot of hospitals. And there were about 1,000 of them we had to do in that first 6 months
Right.
between January and June of 2014. And during that period, we nearly lost our licensing program with respect to pharmacies, and it impacted our enforcement efforts because literally we had to get those hospital pharmacies licensed or else we would have had serious patient care issues.
Well, plus in general, many times it takes more than a year to close a case. So they could go on for 2 or 3 years. So you might have several years of cases
Right, but
that are
even-
now
even-
closing in 1 year.
But
Correct.
So if it's higher, it would speak well because you're closing cases that are further
That are
further
old.
back,
Right.
and so. But if it's just
But I
these
hope that that's
artifacts,
what we're seeing in that the numbers are climbing from the low in 2014, that you can start seeing the closures are starting to increase, and that would allow us to redirect and resolve some of the issues. It may be simply that we just had more cases that we closed during that period as well. But I don't think the other stats showed that. I think this one kind of shows that we're working on trying to close some of those out. But there's probably on any number of these, the generalizations you make may be only just that, a generalization that may or may not be entirely accurate.
right, and that's why I ask. Yeah.
And I know you've got the information on the citations, which ones had fines and which ones did not on an upcoming slide.
Yeah.
I
Yeah, we'll
think.
do
So we'll
that.
see that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. The next one, this is a slide that we added in based on the enforcement committee meeting, because we were talking about, well, what do you look at when you're assessing a citation? And it is in the law, the specific things that we look at and the parameters in the law that we consider when we're assessing a citation. The seriousness, the good faith of an individual or an entity, the history, past violations, the willfulness. So just keep that in mind when we do look at it. There's a method to the madness. It's in the statute. It's in the regulations that we consider all these factors.
You know, it says that we to consider the factors. Is there a weighting to them, or do we just?
Can you say it again? I didn't hear that
Oh,
part.
is there a particular weighting to them, or it says we consider them? How do we consider them? Because it seems like in some of the decisions that I've seen that people are indeed in good faith and they've not had a history of previous violations, and it wasn't willful, but they're really being it's not punished. What's the word?
Disciplined?
Disciplined. Thank you. And that was on purpose, you know.
I know, and it came out of my mouth, I know.
And so I wondered if there was any factor that has more weight or less weight, or aside from gravity and bad faith, you know, obviously.
So I want to make sure that I'm understanding your question. Are you speaking specific to citations, or you used the word discipline? So I was wondering if you were referring to administrative cases.
You know, in
That's
a
my
certain
question.
sense, I'm thinking more of administrative cases because I know less of the discipline cases, I guess, in response to your question. Yeah.
So what this slide is talking specifically to are the factors that need to be considered when assessing a citation.
Oh,
So,
okay.
like the board's disciplinary guidelines and other things with respect to unprofessional conduct and things maybe speak more to the discipline, and we can do a little presentation in the future if that would be helpful to talk about that if you'd like.
That's great.
Look, I'm
yeah.
just adding to Julie's plate.
Yeah,
like
that's
nobody's-
great. Yes, she's your good buddy there. Okay.
I had a question on citations. What are the consequences for a citation? I mean, you get a citation like a warning, and then you get a second one, third one. Is that like a fine to it, or
There is-
can you let me know what?
Yeah,
that
you could.
is?
It can be with or without a fine. So there's two real kind of warnings, I guess we can call them. There's a letter of admonishment, and then there's a citation. The letter of admonishment is kind of a lower level warning, and then the citation is it's administrative action, both of them. And the citation is a little higher warning, I guess you would say, and it can be with a fine or without a fine. the citation specifically.
How much are those fines, if you don't mind me asking?
The citation
Average.
again can be anywhere between no fine to $5,000, and again that's in statute.
And a
Okay, and
citation.
is there a point where you get too many citations that you could take it to a, like, suspension or anything like that?
So that would be through the disciplinary So that would be through the disciplinary process, and so we'll bring that back to a future committee so that you can understand what our thinking is for something that results in formal administrative action through seeking to discipline, either remove or restrict a license.
But to clarify, a citation is not discipline. But citations can be used as disciplinary considerations if a disciplinary matter is brought.
So
Good.
does both a letter of admonishment and a citation, let me say it again, I think both, do either of those appear on the board website?
They're
Is it
not
just
on they're not on the website,
Okay.
but they are on the record of that licensee, whether it's a pharmacy or the pharmacist. It's on record. So the letter of admonishment stays on for 3 years, and the citation stays on the record for 5 years. And it's not something that it is public. If somebody were to ask us for it, we would divulge it, but it's not on the website. It's not listed on the
Because
website.
Because it's not considered discipline, is that the fine line?
That's part of it, yes. The part of it is that it's viewed as a very strong warning. This happened, it shouldn't have happened, please don't do it again. And part of that is the evaluation, that when they sign the citation or the citation with a fine by writing a check, that we recognize that the matter is pretty much, we consider the matter resolved at that point.
I think it's a great idea. You give them a warning, you help them. It's something they don't understand. Simple violation. I don't think we should be going after everybody for, simple things, but rather educating the industry. But I was thinking more for those cases where they take half the opiates, from the pharmacy store. And some of the cases that we come across, I would imagine, they would have more severe penalties or fines to those.
Yeah, and those are the more egregious cases where we would take them to the Attorney General for disciplinary action, correct?
Yeah, keep seeing some of those. Okay, thank you.
Slide 13. These are the citations that we've issued over the last 5 years. So you show the issued number with or without a fine, the assessed, meaning what was the dollar figure assessed in that year, and then the fines collected. So the assessed value and the collected, it's kind of like the open cases and closed cases. It's not going to exactly match up because some of those fines that we collect may be from the previous year and people paying on previous citations in a prior fiscal or calendar year. The one thing I do want to point out is 2014, you can see there's a huge jump. There's 12 million assessed, and we clearly did not collect on that. But there was a couple of really large internet cases where we're allowed to do $25,000 per violation on an internet case, and we did not collect on that specific one, but that was why that was so high that one particular year.
How we collect more than we assess on the right side.
But
We didn't.
2017 on the bottom.
Oh, they owed
You
us money
collect
from
more
another
than-
Right,
year.
those were
That's the
citations that were,
interest?
well, no,
gonna
we're not
offer
allowed
the
to do
figures.
that. Those were just citations that were probably from a prior year that they were paying, they ended up paying. I mean, maybe we cited them in October, November, December of 2016, and they ended up paying it in January of 2017. We would show the collected amount in 2017 because that's how the data is read.
And I think the other thing is that we are giving you the citation data, I believe, as it was initially issued. If someone has appealed, sometimes as part of an appeal, we would either reduce the fine, reduce the issue to an LOA. There's a lot of different outcomes. So if the citation's not sustained as initially written, that could also reflect in the fines collected.
The same thing with payments. Sometimes we accept payments from techs, for example, that they can't pay the whole maybe $800 fine at one time, and they pay maybe $50 every couple months.
Yeah, we can put them on a payment plan if they can't afford it. Yep. So if you go to the next slide, we're going to just talk about the specific citations. We did a drill down for 2017, and you can see that we had 968 cases, and it resulted in 2,003 citations. And this is where, we've talked about, there may be more than one respondent. One case may have more than one citation may have more than one violation. And then we provide you with and I gave you these numbers before, but just with a fine, without a fine. But what Anne had kind of alluded to earlier was we can also do different things in terms of, we have this order of abatement that is in the law. And in 2017, we issued 43 citations with an order of abatement. And what that means is it allows the licensee, we can put it within the citation to demonstrate how future compliance will be accomplished. They may be able to, we can ask them for a corrective plan of action. We can have a requirement where we can ask them to do some more continuing education. For example, let's say we do a compounding citation, and the citation is written for $1,000. We can have a order of abatement in there and say, if you do 6 hours of compounding continuing education, we'll abate $500 of the fine. It's kind of like you DMV and you go to traffic school and you can get the fine decreased, and then it shows good faith and continuing education on the practice, and that's why we're all here.
So based on these numbers,
Yeah.
it's about the average fine is around 1,400. If you divide the 2 million by the 1526.
I think I have that number at the end of this presentation, but for 2017, I had it at 1,000, but for these specifically, this was with unlicensed individuals too. So yeah, I didn't do the exact, but it was 1,400.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just talking about the ones with fine, and the fines assessed or collected. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's about the same.
Yep. One other thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm not sure if we talked about it yet, is citations. There's an allowance for an appeal. So you get a citation and you want to talk to somebody about it. You want to have a discussion about it. You want to bring some mitigating information to the attention of the board. You can appeal the citation and contest it in an office conference. And that's it's an informal setting. You come to our board offices. We have them in Northern California as well as Southern California on a monthly basis. Ginny, myself, Tom Lennox, and some of our supervising inspectors, and the licensee can come in and we can talk about what the citation was about. They can explain to us, was there something else going on that we possibly weren't aware of, and they can explain their side. So there is an appeal process to this. If at the end of that discussion, we have 3 things we can do. We can affirm the citation, dismiss the citation, or we can modify the citation. And if the licensee still believes, I'm still not happy with this, they can also appeal it to an administrative law judge. You can go ahead. And so then we did a little bit of a drill down in detailing what happened within one quarter in 2017 to provide a little bit more additional context. In the first column, these are the top citation violations across that quarter. And the description, I didn't put the exact BMP code or the regulation. I just gave a kind of a verbal description. But that's the violation in the first column, the number of licensees that were cited for that specific violation, the fine, and then the fine range there. And we looked at, I think, 692 citations during that period. Yes?
So I realize this is top citations.
Yes.
But like in a mid-area.
Yes.
Or pharmacy security.
Yep.
And the average fine is $779 or $483. In any of these instances, could this wind up as a revocation of license?
So the outcome of the investigation is the citation. It's not that we're issuing a citation and also referring something to the AG's office.
So what is the difference between a security issue or a med error and a citation, and a security issue and a med error, and that result in revocation of a license?
A med-air
Med-air will
leading to
probably
formal
not.
discipline would probably be a case where we believe gross negligence was exhibited in the air. That it was a medication or a process that was so flawed or distorted that it crossed the zone from negligence to gross negligence. And we would have to be able to prove that in a hearing. So there's an example there. With security of the pharmacy, that would be the difference perhaps between a loss of 1,000 pills or 2,000 pills and 50,000 pills.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Go to the next one. So this is just, yeah, go ahead, Greg.
We're all getting tagged.
On the failure to report, it says that the fine amounts, there are 87 fines from $200 to $325.
Right.
Yet it says the average is $325. So how do you get an average of $325 when it's $200 to $325? Keep in mind the accountant's
I know.
talking here, so.
Good question, and I will
He knows
figure
how.
that out.
He knows how. He could explain it.
No, you're
The
right.
immediate answer to that question, of course, Greg, is there was only one $200 and the rest of them were $325. But I don't
Even if
know
that
that's
was the
true.
case, it's still
I
an
don't-
average
I think-
$325.
I think Julie wants
Yeah,
to go
it
back.
means it.
Julie wants to go back and fix it. So
I can fix
Well,
it.
they didn't report it. They should have been 325. Yeah.
something got it.
I'm sure it was just probably a typo.
So the next slide is still the same kind of information, just documenting the types of violations. But what I wanted to point out is, I think in these two slides, there's approximately 240 pharmacies that were issued citations in this fourth quarter. And what we went back and just kind of looked at some past data, and I just wanted to point out that actually of those 240 pharmacies that were issued citations, 25% of them were issued citations actually within the past 5 years. So this was their second in the past 5 years.
What's that percentage again?
25%. And then we then went back and looked farther back and said, okay, what about not 5 years, but 5 years past? So anything older than 5 years ago, right? 2013 and older. And we found that 20% of those pharmacies had had a citation issued to them 5 years or older. So just,
Is that additive? So is it a total of 45%, or is that 20% could be part of the 25? So the 25% within the last 5 years also had citations?
no, it was
additive, so it's 45% had a citation within the last 10 years.
There could be doubles in there.
There was a few,
Okay.
yeah. There could be doubles, but for them, there were some. I could get you the exact number and say, it was 33% of all of those 240 were issued citations in previous years, but I could figure that out. if
Well,
you
I mean,
needed
so
that.
it just kind of speaks to if you find a pharmacy and you issue a citation, it's probably a good idea to go back, because it seems like there's a propensity that they don't necessarily fix their behavior.
Right.
Part of an investigation report that's written up,
Shows the
Ms.
past.
Veal, is we look at the prior history for
Mhm.
each of the respondents in the case. And so if there had been prior citation fines or even prior discipline, that would be listed there.
We're aware of that.
So,
when we
so
look at it.
you're aware of that as part of the time you determine what an appropriate consequence would be. You already have the history in front of you.
But are you
Yeah,
I know what you're
Yeah, I'm suggesting that if a pharmacy has a citation, kind of those figures kind of indicate that it'd be a good idea maybe to go back and visit them again, because it seems like
It might pay off.
It's kind of like
In
how
terms of
I mean-
identifying something else that needs to be
Right.
corrected.
Yeah, I mean,
got you.
it's all about patient safety and, the
Mhm.
consumers, and so if those are the guys, that first group, that we looked at, that you were just doing routine, it seemed like there weren't that many, I think that we're gonna find this high percentage, there aren't any issues, but the guys and the girls where there's citation, it seems like we need to go back and,
Take a look.
help educate and protect the consumer.
So how much do we educate?
That's the corrections.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's what this is, I mean, I think that's really what this is all about. We educate and then,
Go on.
yeah. But these are educations that are concerning, and so they get a citation.
And I think our hope with doing more routines in the next year, we'll be able to provide more education going forward.
That's kind of what the board's asked us, or what the committee's asked us
Yep.
to do.
It just, I mean, the perception out there is that it's a police issue and not an investigation issue. And when we hear something, we hear somebody who is really a disgruntled person who's had a bad experience, and it's probably mostly due to something he did or didn't do,
Right.
and so, but you almost never hear about it. I mean, if we want to believe that fines and consequences such as these, or even more, are educational opportunities, then I guess it's educational. But there are times when we hear, from the licensees that it's not an educational experience, and it's you go in there and you have somebody's license at risk, and it can be terrorizing. And I know I've said things like this before, and it's not, I don't direct it towards anybody in particular, but it's just the perception of our licensees that this is what they're confronted with when an inspector hits the door.
But I think that's part of what our discussion was on page 7 was that, and why they're going to go back and tell us, because I think we're going to find out that a large number, the 144 facilities had no violations. I think we're going to find out that that was a high percent of the routine. And that the ones that have violations are when we're going in because there's a complaint. And if there's a complaint, then I think that it's warranted. And, I want to make sure we're educating the pharmacies, just like you do, just like we all do. We've talked about this ad nauseum, but I think also our job is to make sure we're protecting the consumer. And
Our primary concern is protecting the consumer.
Right.
And I don't want to get away from that. But as we go on and we look at other aspects of what we do, and we look at some of the discipline, as we go on, and I don't want to get involved in a whole discussion prematurely about other issues that we're going to be dealing with, but as we go on, as we look at other issues, and of course, as individuals, we are involved in the decision on what to do with somebody who has done something in violation of what we would expect them to do. I'm talking about the mail votes and everything. And so, as you read those cases, me, a pharmacist and not an attorney, but it's hard for me sometimes to find consistency. Sometimes it's even hard for me to find logic. And so I think that's what I'm referring to. I mean, we hear about all these statistics, and they're great. But when you hear from people that we license, and when you read some of the consequences that are imposed upon people who have done something wrong, whether it be significant or whether in the mind of the reader it isn't as significant, sometimes you have trouble, in my view, finding logic or reason in what we're doing.
well, so my only thought to that is if that happens when you're doing a mail vote, then those are the mail votes that we need to bring back and talk to as a group.
And
Because I think that's what we do as a group is we make sure we standardize those.
Right.
Part of my challenge with this, when I looked at this, and I made this comment at the enforcement committee, at what point are we protecting the public and at what point are we punishing? Because I think we walk a fine line. Because some of these you can see are obvious. I mean, failure to report a PIC, there's a policy for that, And there's a comment I made at the enforcement committee. I don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to make a med error today. It's not something that, it's not a violation, an act that you make to try to avert regulation. So at some point, I think we just got to look at this, because I know all the med safety and all the med error, it's about looking at systems And if it is a person that actually, if I did something wrong and I violated a policy and I was a pharmacist and I did something, then maybe I should get punished. But if I went to work and I made a med error as part of my normal process, does that really warrant having a fine issued to you? So
But, I mean, I think we've talked the med error one before. I mean, because I think there's that's the whole rat hole we can go down, because I think you have to look at, is that the first med error? Because I agree with you, we don't wake up and say, I'm gonna go and make a mistake today. But if the person does it repeatedly, then there's an
I agree,
issue.
but I would probably question how many of these were first times.
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
in terms of, I could agree if it was a second or third, but if you fill 150 prescriptions a day, none of us that are sitting at this table have never made a med error. So for us to have to go and find somebody, to me, sounds a lot like punishment, and that's a concern I have with some of this.
Julie?
So let's.
Yeah, I have a question. From your experience, I mean, how you feel? Is it work better as educate? I mean, our whole objective here is, consumer protection and safety. From your experience, what do you think? Is this a, punishment or educational work better?
I think we have to balance both, honestly. Some of these, when we get a complaint from a consumer or a mother, as Stan has talked about in the past, we have to look into it. That's our mandate, is to look at every complaint that comes in. And if you go back to that slide 11, 2017, we issued 2,000 citations that year, but we also closed 1,500 of those cases in that 1 year. I think that the education going forward, I hope we'll be able to do a better job as we increase the amounts of routine inspections we do. I think it's just a delicate balance between the two.
Well, what I would like to see if is education serve the purpose, we should emphasize a little bit more on that.
So I think that one of the things So
I think they maximize us. After a certain point, they turn us off. Yeah.
They're like, you're done talking. Well, I'm done talking.
So many concurrent people on at the same time.
I think it's just Ann that gets turned off.
So one of the things that maybe we want to consider is we talked a little bit about the proof of abatements, and really the abatements really do a lot of times maybe we're requiring them to do remedial education in an area. So maybe one of the outcomes of this presentation is guidance to staff, really avail the order of abatements more and see when we do, so put that into effect and then do another post-implementation, perhaps another comprehensive review in 2 to 3 years, and see if the recidivism in terms of issuing a subsequent citation actually diminishes. So that might be one of the things that if that's something, if you want to give us that policy guidance.
I totally agree with that, and just what you said, because you just can't say, I'm educating you when I go out and hit you with a $5,000 fine. This is called educational. So like you said, you have to look at the whole scope of the licensee. If they have no history, no other violation, everything was done, even if you make a mistake, by hitting you with a $5,000 fine, they're going to teach you. You call it educational. This is really awful. And besides, the board, we don't see the citations. We see the disciplinary cases, but a lot of these sort of citations, how it was being done, what the rationale you guys did, we didn't know. But when we went outside there and all the licensee, we were looking at all the board members angrily and say, God, you guys are so nasty, hitting people with all the fines. We didn't even know that, because most of the time, the board members don't even see the rationale all behind the citations. So like you said, it should be educational. As you give them a few chances to do the correction. If they don't, then you hit them with a fine. That was totally okay.
Can I make a suggestion, Ann? What about with the med errors? Can we have order of abatement maybe to attend a med safety course, or
so we can totally start building
that would
in some of
be
the things.
really
What would be, so the only thing that with respect to the med errors, I find that at least in some of the cases that I review, I feel like someone just wasn't functioning as a pharmacist at that time. Do you know what I'm saying? It was maybe not a system error. It was, there's no way that an infant should ever get
Unconstituted.
Or do you know what I'm saying? So I totally hear what you're saying.
But if it's a
yes, we
first
can-
time, if it's a first time event and because all of us, I mean, I don't know how many times when you run a stoplight, you don't do that on just because you're thinking you're going to run a stop sign, and you may have seen it always there. It's something called unintentional blindness that can actually happen. So could we then, for the first time, consider? And I truly believe that if you look at a lot of the just culture, it's not what happens to the patient, it's the act. So it doesn't matter if I misfill a prescription and something happens to them or not, I still should get the same type of action.
So here's what I'll say is that if we want to make that a general rule of application, that in every single case we do that, we need to pass a regulation. If you're giving us policy guidance that says, please consider in all medication errors whether or not it's appropriate to do that, I do not believe we need regulation because we already have those factors.
I think
But
that's
if you're
what
going
we
to say
should
in
do.
every single case do this, I believe we would need a law.
No, and there's going to be
Policy.
some that are really egregious, and there's been a lot of them, or the second or third time that you've gone on the same one. But just because someone does things one time, and consider that as a potential.
Consider that along with the impact of what the error created. So in other words, if it's the
including
first
all of the
time, but
factors.
No,
somebody
but you know what?
dies because of
But you know
it,
what
it's-
happened, Greg? Most of the time when that happened, if you look back, it's happened other times before, and someone never caught it. So you don't always want to look at the outcome. You want to look at the actual cause.
I'm just saying, look at the two together.
I have
Okay,
a question.
We're gonna have a hard time though tracking a mid-air that we don't do anything with. We don't have any way to track that mid-air you did 3 years ago because we don't have a citation, we don't have a fine, nor do we put a tag on your license.
Can you give a citation
Without
without
a
a
fine.
fine? And
Yeah.
the citation with order of abatement.
That is.
Yeah, that's what
order
we're
of
saying,
abatement.
like a traffic
It's not so
ticket or
much the
something.
money
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
occurs,
Page
it's the
is
financial
Yep.
impact of giving something to a pharmacist.
It just seems too much like punishment. When you
Right.
when you have to write a $3,000 check, that's really
So
sometimes
the other thing that I will say is there's no requirement in the law for us to be notified of a medication error. So this may be the first error that we're aware of that someone did, but it does not mean that it's the first error that
Okay,
they've
that's what I
done.
wanted to question you on, because I'm looking at page 15 for medication errors, and it's 71 pharmacists, and I'm thinking in a 3-month period, and we have 45,000 pharmacists.
Yeah,
This is pretty low.
that's,
There
yeah.
is no requirement. There is
And
no
then
requirement.
65, there's no fine, so.
Yeah, but you can't compare it to 45,000 pharmacists. You know, you're talking about
I mean, I
the
know
ones that
a medication error matters, but I'm still saying it's still
you have
not.
to compare it to the number of licensees that were inspected, and so that percentage might change. The absolute number, I admit, is indeed small.
Right, that's
Yeah.
all I'm saying.
And it's very similar. Someplace in here, I saw. Oh, right here. That the number of. Here we go. In 2000, not to give away anything on page 18, but
Well, I haven't gotten to 7. Can I do 17 first?
Yeah,
And then
no,
we can
no,
go
no.
to 18?
In 2017, there were 65 citations issued for citing California failure to consult. Now, gee, we're doing a good job, I guess.
No, we know that that's a problem.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's a very good point.
65?
Yeah. So we all know that's
That's not
incorrect.
true.
So a lot of these statistics are misleading, but as far as this point that we're discussing now, we can go on forever discussing that. I think we should discuss it in committee with further detail, and I think we can have some fruitful discussion with that.
Are you speaking specific to the medication error piece that we were just
Yeah,
discussing?
right.
thank you.
Okay. So go ahead and take a look at 17. And so we just looked at that one quarter and just the types of medication errors. I don't need to go into it at great. Yeah, we can go into it at the next meeting, but this gives you kind of a breakdown of the percentages. But we can do a further drill down in the next enforcement committee meeting. And
Since I ruined the next page, yeah.
Alan stole my thunder on that one, so we'll round it up on the last one. And this is just citations issued to the licensees and the fines assessed.
Yeah, I don't like that one either.
And you don't like this one?
I don't like that one
That's
either.
okay.
And,
You don't
and
have
the
to
reason
like
that,
it.
And the reason that I don't like it, for the reason that I just spoke to Cheryl about, is that this total licensees, 133,000, and it's if we had inspected every one of those licensees, that would be an accurate number. But we only inspected, I don't know how many thousand licensees.
25.
And so I think I like this graph without the percentage in there is fine. But we should do. I think if it comes to 9% or 10%, if we do the sample, if we take the percentage of the sample. And so is that a high percent? Is that a low percent? I don't know. It seems like kind of a high percent, but it might be accurate. So I think we should look into those numbers just a little bit more.
Yeah, so but the only other thing that I'll say, just to add a little bit of context to that, is when you go out to do an inspection of a pharmacy, there's staff there as well, and so they're counted in that total licensee count. Do you know what I'm saying? So we could either break it out by the sites or try to come up with a different way to do it. But the total licensees, I don't think that you can draw a direct correlation to the total licensees based on the site inspections, if you know what I'm saying,
Correct,
because there's individuals involved as well.
Well, I think it'd be interesting to correlate to do those numbers since you suggested that. That's a great idea, Ann. And
Killing me.
and I would like to know.
Julie's gonna get to do it.
Oh, okay, okay, but. I would also like to know the number in these citations of pharmacists, pharmacies, etc. I'd like to know the number of PICs that are inspected and the number of PICs that have fines or citations or something like that.
So when you say PICs inspected, do you mean those that are present at the time that the inspection is happening? Because they'll generally, by law, they'll always be a PIC, right? So are you talking about when the inspection occurs that the PIC is present?
Or they're on record.
No. I'm interested in the citations, that go to the
Citations that were issued to them in their capacity as a PIC versus in their capacity
Boy,
as a
that would
pharmacist.
be nice to have both of that, yeah.
You're killing me.
No. And I don't mean, I only mean to be a little bit of a jerk, not a big jerk. I find, I, as well as the rest of the board, find these numbers very important, and they find them interesting, and they allow us to address members of the profession in ways that they can relate to. And I think this adds to the transparency, and because this is stuff that the board hasn't gotten into previously. It's a matter of professional concern, and so I think it should be out there. And then when somebody says something to the board, we can say, we've brought this to light, we've talked about it, and everybody knows it, And so, no, I really appreciate, and I know the rest of the board does too.
And I agree with Alan, and I think if we look at order of abatements that may be more meaningful to carry out our public protection role, that may be more valuable than sticking them with a several $1,000 fine. So maybe we could think of other ways and then really start focusing on public protection.
So order of abatements can be done a couple of different ways. Sometimes they're mandated, sometimes they are in lieu of a fine. So we'll explore some of the different options, and if it's okay to leave it to board staff, we've heard what your desire is in terms of that, and we'll implement.
Yeah, and we can refine it. You can do even more reports as we go.
Refine as needed.
And I think per Victor's comment, I agree with him that when the public looks at us, they think we know about all these fines and these citations. And this is really informative because it gives us an idea of what's actually happening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great report.
Thanks a lot. Wonderful.
Yeah, hopefully we really do appreciate, Julia, what you've done here. And you don't feel like you're on the hot seat.
No, great report.
Yeah, we really appreciate this
learned,
information.
thank you. I learned something new every day at this job. It's incredibly challenging, and it's just a pleasure to be working with this organization, with Ann and Ginny
You
and
Tom
all of you.
did such a great job on this. We told you at the enforcement
Thank
committee.
you.
It was very well done.
My pleasure.
And your
Thank you.
presentation is very professional, and the answers that you give are really appreciated. Really well done.
through Ann.
So I'm going to jump in as well, and I just want to thank you for the job you're doing, for the board, and what you're doing is certainly appreciated by every one of us. So thanks.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Ditto.
Okay, ditto.
To continue on. See, I told you it wasn't controversial, Stan. Okay.
I know. I think Sam's
Definition.
got you beat right now.
Oh, please.
Oh, we should do public comment.
Yeah, public comment.
I just want to add on behalf of CPHA, at the Enforcement and Compounding Committee, I did express concern from our members of kind of what has been said. And I've spoken with Julia and with Tom separately on a couple of occasions now. And we are committed to getting a much more educational perspective of our pharmacists with the enforcement group and staffers. And we're really anxious to get to work on that. And I've already kind of started to think about ideas of how we can work together. But as CPHA, we're really excited that to be moving in this direction, and we look forward to working with the enforcement branch on that.
Thank you. Oh, here we go. Oh.
It's Ray.
It's not Ralph.
Right.
It's Ray.
That's right.
Pharmacist.
Or Jay. Yeah.
All the name tags have fallen off the
Oh,
board
they have.
member
Well,
at the end.
For good reason. We planned on that. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
That's not why I'm here.
I
I wanted to
Worked out
follow
better.
up on Albert's comment, having to do with what the inspectors discover and what goes to the board for punishment, to use a term, or discipline. And whether or not during the discovery process of an investigator that they identify that a public crime has been committed. The uncertainty in my mind whether or not that's actually going to be turned over to local law enforcement or the DEA or the Attorney General or whatever. It just sounded like we were being very silo-ish in terms of getting other police agencies involved. And I think that's where you were going, Albert. Silo-ish.
Silo-ish.
It's kind of, it's a Ralph term.
Into silos.
We have more work than we can do, and so do all the other agencies. The one thing we offer law enforcement, we have licensed pharmacists that can walk into a pharmacy and identify a generic equivalent of another drug, and they can look and tell when records look like they've been altered in a way to hide things. As such, we are incredibly valuable to law enforcement, that when they go in, it is not the least bit unusual for them to call and ask us to go out with them to help. To the degree that when they serve search warrants, we actually tend to want to hold our staff back a little bit because it's dangerous for them sometimes to go in, because we're not allowed to wear BOP jackets when they go in. But we're invited quite frequently.
Referrals.
It absolutely depends on what it is. So, and sometimes we're together. Well, the DAs aren't interested in a loss of 50,000 or maybe 10,000 pills because they look at the retail value of the pill, not the street value of the pill, for example. We've tried really hard to educate them that you take the street value of the pill, which is why the promethylcodeine is being broken into and walking out of pharmacies. So part of that is an education process on our part. But keep in mind that in many counties, you can't get the DAs involved in some of these lower level pharmacy crimes because they're dealing with other types of crime that they view as more prosecutable for whatever reason.
But if they're higher level, where people are dying and stuff like that, we turn it over.
We absolutely do, because we don't have the resources. And a pharmacist working that doesn't have a license, we use local PD to stop it immediately because we don't have the tools really to do that.
Well, continue to have no punishment for all those crimes. That's why you continue to have this opioid problem in this country. So, I think we have to do something to make them feel the pain so they don't keep repeating all this diversion problem we have.
Hi, William Stewart again. I wanted to address actually the word discipline. And I've heard this before, and I've heard the discussions, is that the board has to act to protect the public. but the discipline it may be viewed in other states differently, and it has a broad definition in their terms where, and I've heard the state of California discuss discipline. Don't do this again. You've made an error regarding pharmacy laws and regulations, but other states may take that into a different perspective. And so when you are disciplined within your own state or other states, you have to notify the other states. And so if there are certain fines associated with those disciplines, in the industry we call it a domino effect, because that other state may apply, and they have on their books, if you've been disciplined in that state, we will discipline you, and we will discipline you in an equal fashion as well. So sometimes I don't go to work wanting to make a dispensing error. I've made a dispensing error, and I'm disciplined, and I'm fined $1,000. Other states, it gives other states the opportunity to fine you as well. So it amplifies the pain of an error that you did not intentionally want to make. Take out the ones where we make a mistake, and I understand the form of an investigation and a discipline process. But I just want to let you know that there's almost like a ripple effect of other states for those pharmacies who are licensed with other states. Just wanted to make that out. Thank you.
And before Dr. Simonian starts speaking, I'm going to take a moment here. In that regard, one of the things the board does do is we'll send a letter to the individual when they request it, that this is not considered discipline in California. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. I've discussed it nationally with other executive officers from other boards of pharmacies because it does imperil. A number of states do what we do independently, and they do treat it as you shouldn't have done this, move on. But there are some states that use it, and there is a lot of Me Too-ism that goes on out there when that happens. And so hopefully through education, some of that will go away.
Rafi Simonian, UCSD, soon to be retired pharmacist in 2 months.
Congratulations.
And I can relinquish my title of pick of 2 different pharmacies and 4 sterile compounding pharmacies. Not that I'm looking forward to that tremendously. But I've been fascinated by the discussion over the last 45 minutes. First of all, you guys are very fortunate to have amazing data from your staff. And the board's really understaffed. The scope of the responsibility in California and the amount of people you have, it's a mismatch. You can't really do everything you have to do. But I did like the fact that you're grappling with how can this data help you protect the public better. Right. And what I saw, because I'm in academics and I'm also in operations, and so I have to deal with this every day in my job. So here's 3 things I saw from the data. One is that 4 years ago, you guys implemented, tried to go down the path of trying to inspect sterile compounding. And a lot has happened. And of the violations that were put out there, 7 of the 10 violations were around sterile compounding. And the public has been protected tremendously by the efforts of the board. And the board's the leader in the entire state, in the United States, on this subject matter. So that's a huge outcome because a lot of people aren't getting infected or injured by compounded product. Of the written violations, the top item was controlled substances. And guess what? You have a new regulation that I have to start counting my C2s, which I still do. I do it already. But then report to you, and you're going to be finding things. And I think there should be serious consequences from the people who are diverting medications. And this has been happening since I was on the board. And it's very difficult to prosecute those people, very difficult to shut them down. But that would be one way to improve the safety of the public, by shutting these people down. You mentioned Jay Scott